Hi everyone, my name is James Patrick Herman. I'm a contributor to Variety, and this evening it's my pleasure to welcome singer-songwriter Rain Phoenix.
Hi everyone.
So I wanted to start off by talking about these videos. I think one of the really special things is that all of the directors were friends of River. Tell me how that worked out.
Yeah, okay, so before we do that, I just want to say that talking about myself is not my favorite thing to do, but I'm also really grateful for the opportunity to speak about this record and my music. And so for me, it would help make me feel better about this if I could very quickly think about all the effort it took for you to come and to write the questions, for SAG-AFTRA to include me tonight, and for all of you in the audience, all the effort it took for you to drive here, the dinner that you may or may not have skipped to be here. And just add all that goodness to this conversation. I'll feel much better spending some time talking about me, because But to answer your question in regard to the videos, yes, it was very intentional on my part to include River's friends in making the moving images to go with the songs for this record, River. And it very, very easily lined up. I didn't know exactly who or what or when, but I just knew that I wanted to do the body of work to have it be related to him somehow, and include his friends in what was already proving to me to be a very healing and cathartic experience.
Talk to me a little bit about the visual concepts for these videos. Did you want to contribute to that, or did you want the directors to have their own vision?
Yeah, I in regard to, I'll just break it down one at a time so I can tell you how it kind of came to be, but in regard to the Time is the Killer video with Michael Stipe, I contacted him and said, I was thinking I should make a video for this, and he said, sure, I'd be happy to be involved. I see us in black and white around a really expensive mic. A very expensive mic in a studio. That's what I see. So that was the inspiration for that video. And then Bradley Gregg, who is a good friend of Rivers, he's here tonight actually, he recommended that we do a color moment dancing in the street together. And so that was also incorporated into it. And Bobby Bukowski, who shot it and directed it as well, he's a really good friend of Rivers and Michael Stipe's. And so we all made that video. We rented a studio for 5 hours in Brooklyn, New York. I flew there to meet Michael. They put up their most expensive mic, and he put Charlie Plummer, who's an actor, a young actor. He was the gaffer, so we included him as in crew, and he put his chapstick on the divider glass to make that really sort of strange looking washy visual on my face and Michael's when it kind of smears between shots. So that was Bobby's idea, and we literally made it in under 5 hours for about the price of a plane ticket and the rental of the space, which was really actually quite cheap. So don't tell anyone our secrets. Oh wait, this is on TV.
And talk to me a little bit about the other two videos.
Yeah, so that was that one. What played second? It was Time is the Killer, and then I'm guessing it was Immolate. Yeah. Oh yeah, you would know. So Immolate was, I asked Gus about making a video, and he was, he basically said he said, I'd love to be involved with something having to do with this project, but I'm not a good video director. Like he had this perception of himself as that he had attempted to make videos and not done them well, which I immediately wanted to debunk with this, so I insisted he make it anyway, even if it was bad. I was like, I want you to make the video. And I just asked him to to talk about visually the universality of loss, because that's really what the record is about, is connecting all of us around the subject of death and loss. It's something that culturally we don't speak very much about, and there's a lot of, loneliness when it comes to grieving, and a lot of times that's what we want, to not be around other people, but that it's important to speak about that for those that could use the support. So anyway, that was what he came back with, was this beautiful different close-ups of people from all over the world and different religious and cultural backgrounds, and I loved it. So that's how that came to be. And then with Lost in Motion, Catherine Keener is a friend of mine, and was a very good friend of River's as well. And we were just at her house one night talking about the record. She really loved what she had heard. It wasn't out yet, and we were talking about it. And I said, would you ever consider doing a video? And she and her son were thinking about doing videos. Basically, they were starting to consider that. And her son was in the house, and she asked him about it. And literally a half hour later, she had me in this white bathing suit and in the pool, and that was how that video came to be. Everything happened very in the moment, and not a lot of fanfare, but a lot of love and a lot of good intention.
And I just want to point out that Gus Van Sant directed, of course, both your brother and you, and even Cowgirls Get the Blues. And it's very ironic that he doesn't think that he's a good video director, because it's such a beautiful video. How does it feel, I guess, to trust someone to interpret your vision, visually?
Well, I think it's easier when the person is someone that you've watched make incredible art. I think it's a little bit more dangerous when you're just guessing someone might be good at something, and then how do you tell them you don't like it, right? So in this case, I was blessed to be asking people that had far greater experience in filmmaking and storytelling than I did. So I think when you surround yourself with people who are gifted, you're not as nervous about the outcome, and certainly if you connect it, in my case, connecting it to this record and to River's memory was the main point that I shared with everyone involved artistically. So it just kind of levels everyone's resonating at the same frequency, to use a sound metaphor about it.
So we know that this was Catherine's video directing debut, and you were also inspired to direct a video and make your debut as a director. But you had, I think, a very DIY, low-tech approach. Would you talk a little bit about what your video involved in terms of, you didn't rent a fancy studio or...
James is talking about, I made a video for Time is the Killer, a different version, a piano version, which is on the record River. And I made that myself with an iPhone and an empty pool, and I used a trash can as my tripod. And I just pointed the iPhone down in this empty pool, and I put it in slow-mo mode, and I put on a crazy silver dress that Catherine had given me, and I just did an emotive dance in slow motion, and that is what became the video for Time is the Killer. At the time, I really shot it knowing it might be used for some video, but it wasn't even specific necessarily. And then I put that track to it, and it just matched up. It was one of those happy accidents.
It sort of begs the question, is directing something that you would be interested in pursuing more?
I mean, who knows? If I don't die tomorrow, there's all kinds of cool things I could maybe do. I love to, I'm a multi-platform artist. I really don't identify with one thing. And I've just, at my age, finally accepted that and not had any sort of shame around it. I should have pursued one thing and stuck to it. I realize that what feeds me creatively is what's nourishing. And sometimes it's music, and mostly it has been music, but sometimes it's acting, and a lot of times it's producing and highlighting other artists. That's something that I'm most fond of, is seeing how I can help other artists as well and change culture. Ultimately, it's all for me about what are the things I'm doing. Is any of it helping to move the needle, and does any of it connect to something deeper than just me expressing myself and people liking it or not? It's more like the wish to be of benefit, the wish to be a cause of alleviating some of the suffering in some small way. And I'm not sure I've done that, but that aspiration has helped guide me to not judge myself anymore when I suddenly pivot from making music to doing a movie or doing something else and not really staying on one.
You've been making music for over 30 years, and yet this is your first solo album as a solo artist. What do you think you waited so long to present yourself as a solo artist? It's
scary. It's probably the first answer, to be the most honest answer. But I also don't feel that I ever had an urge to. I didn't have music that spoke to me wanting to share it as me as much as I was exploring music. For me, music came immediately, showed up in my life next to my brother River. We played together constantly musically. And so that it was really my only introduction and my only journey with music was with him. So when he passed away, I think I was searching for how to keep doing what I obviously had an affinity for, music, and keep singing, but how to do that without my number one collaborator. Like, how do you what that meant. And I think I explored, I experimented, I tried various different avenues, bands, productions, and to be honest, it just didn't make sense until this record and until I realized that I had to include him in order to have a solo career. That was the most important thing for me and for my own healing as a musician, was that he had to be a part, because he had always been a part. And so to sort of shut that out and say, I'm going to make a solo thing and not include him would have actually been false to like who I am as a musician, because it all kind of came from our time together. So I would say that's why I waited till now, is it took me that long to realize that, and I'm grateful for the journey and the many other things I had the opportunity to do on the way. But yeah.
Your family is very musical. I was curious, like, what your earliest musical memory is. It seems like you grew up with a love for music that was encouraged by your parents.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd say probably just singing at home, like singing. River would play guitar and I would sing, and we would sing through any number. And he wrote original songs as early as like 5 or 6. He started writing. So, and I was always like his go-to, like this is the chorus, go. Like we were a team. So that's probably it was fun. It was, the joyfulness of music at home.
I just realized it sort of reminds me of the relationship that Billie Eilish and Phineas have as a brother-sister,
There's something
collaborators.
About siblings that's really special, I think, in any kind of artistic collaboration and in life in general. For all of you who have siblings, I'm sure you have experienced that too. But yeah, with music, it creates a kind of shorthand. There's been a number of people who, because my other siblings also are musicians, and we play together or write songs together, which you just might not have heard of them, but we do that. And anyone who's collaborated with us or recorded us will be like, what did you say? There's a whole shorthand that you don't have to say anything. You just kind of know what chord's coming next and what you're going to do, and it's fun to be able to be that connected with someone that you grew up with and be able to create very effortlessly. And maybe that's not true all the time, but I was very blessed with the siblings I got, because that's been the case for me. I
did want to go back to Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, because that that's a classic LGBTQ movie, a beloved film of Gus's, and a huge sort of debut for you as a very young actress. But then you sort of didn't make a career out of acting, and I just wondered if that was intentional or you just kind of...
I was very young. I had been acting since probably, I think I got my SAG card when I was about 10. I did an episode of Amazing Stories with Phil Joannou directing, with John Lithgow. And I think I was like 10. And I know, right? So I always felt like I had some high pressure first experiences as an actor. And honestly, I don't think, compared to music, it wasn't like, an instant comfort zone. And for me too, I love film and I love acting because of the collaborative aspect, that there's so many art forms involved in making a movie. Every single art form is represented, and so I love it in terms of that. Like the producer part of me gets excited seeing all these artists working together to make something. As an actor, the downtime, I'm somebody who likes to do and be really creative and watch it manifest instantaneously. And I think with acting, it's you might spend all day on one scene and go, where did that day go? I could have written 2 songs. I could have, So there was a part of me that it was based on that. Another was just the age that I was, and to be honest, it came out soon after my brother passed away, and there was just absolutely zero urge to be in the public eye or continue acting, because that basically meant I'd be, and I actually turned down so many opportunities and auditions just following it for obvious reasons. And it's one of those things when you sleep on that, is certainly in filmmaking, and then you have to start all over again. And I never had this like dying urge to start all over again. I could have 2 years later, I just didn't. What I did instead was, when things come my way that I really feel resonance with, and someone says, I really want you to consider this part, or will you, if I like it, I'll do it. So I just kind of made, for acting, it became something that when it's right and the right person comes forward and I feel that the project is really meaningful, or I can resonate with it, and I'd want to spend that time not writing a song or producing another event to spend all day on one scene, then I'll do it. And so I'm actually doing one, coming up like that. So.
And I just want to point out, you actually at that moment, instead of doing another film, you went on a world tour with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. What was that like? And how did it open your eyes as an artist? Do you feel like you learned anything from that?
Absolutely. That couldn't have happened at a better time. That was also so soon after my brother passed, and Flea was one of his best friends. And music is, has always been what's really fed my soul, being able to sing. Like, that's sort of such a release for me as an artist. So for him to ask me to do that, also to be a backup singer in a rock band that everybody knows, they care about is the rock band that they know. They don't care about the 2 girls in the back on microphones helping the vocals sound a little better. So I didn't have to be in the public eye, and I was protected by all these rock dudes, So I think I felt really safe. I was 20, I think. I turned 21 on tour in Europe, and it was one of the most life-changing experiences for me as an artist, because I had always done music, like I said, in a much smaller way. So to have that experience was the reason, I think, that I started pursuing music again, in other bands after that. It gave me the confidence I needed after River passed away to step out and make an effort without him. And I think, that was a huge part, a catalyst for me feeling like I had the strength to do that. So I'm still so grateful to Flea and to that band. It was a wild ride, I'm not gonna lie. Gratefully, they were all sober, so it wasn't too crazy, but it was crazy enough. And I did, we managed to do both the bus tour and the like jet tour. So I got to like experience the crew version and the rock star version, and it was really fun.
So you did have sort of like the old school tour bus experience.
Yeah,
I was thinking it was all
Spain
private
and all
jets.
these amazing. Yeah, but it was. I went with the crew the first leg, and then I went with the band the second leg. So I got to experience both versions, and I always loved the crew. I mean, no offense to the band, but we had a lot of fun. It's so fun to be in a bus all over Europe and hear all their inside jokes and, you know, like learn what it's like to be a guy on the road. Because really, there was 3 women on the entire tour, the monitor woman and myself and my friend Acacia, who sang with me. So it was really fun, though.
I'm sure there were no groupies on that tour.
None that I saw.
I'm curious, you know, growing up, what music were you exposed to? I'm curious, like, what music, like, your parents played around the house, or did they not, and that's why you were encouraged to make your own music?
I'd say Carole King, James Taylor, Cat Stevens, Steely Dan, Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5. Those were kind of the staples at my house, like my parents would play. Steel Pulse, which is a reggae band. My dad loved that band. And so, yeah, a lot of the Beatles, of course. That was all the time. So I think a lot of times I absorb music through others. As an artist, I don't really have, I have a record player and I have all kinds of music, but I tend to listen vicariously through my relationships. And when I'm doing research or I want to know about a band, or I hear there's somebody really great that I'll check it out. But I don't. Unlike a lot of people and a lot of artists, I don't do the soundtrack to my life with music. I don't have to wake up and put on a record and be listening all day to some. Honestly, silence is the greatest thing for me to get work done. Otherwise, I'm too overwhelmed. I'll get stuck just wanting to listen, and I won't do any work. So. It's sort of, I had a lot of influences, but, some of them were from my brother that I, and a lot of them were male, like David Byrne is a huge, in Talking Heads, David Bowie, the Beatles. Those were, Kate Bush was a really big influence, Laurie Anderson, Brian Eno. Those were kind of the influences that I had as a teenager that I think did have something to do with the work that I do now.
What inspired you and your brother to form Aleka's Addict when you were a teenager?
Well, I'd say it was his band, his idea. I mean, like we'd always been. It was just sort of like, I was part of it. So, but yeah, he always was passionate about music, and acting took off first. But I would say that music was his constant, and he was always in his room making 4 tracks and rehearsing, and that was something he was super passionate about. So I think as soon as he was able to, he was established enough to take some time and do what he was really excited to do, i.e. music, he wanted to start a band, and that's how Aleka's Addict came to be.
What are some of your fondest memories of those early performances as Aleka's Addict?
I mean, I think just being a teenager and being and legitimately playing rock venues, and getting to express myself creatively on a stage through an actual mic and not just at home. It definitely helped me become and identify with that as like, oh, I guess I could do this as a career, or this could be something that's not just what we do at home to bring joy. I could actually do this. So it was fun. At the short answer, it was really fun to have a band and be that young and meet other artists and collaborate and travel. All of that was really fun.
And I should mention, you recently decided to put out some unreleased Aleka's Addict music, and would you talk a little bit about, a lot of fans, longtime fans of the band were very excited by that gift on streaming services. Would you talk a little bit about what inspired, that decision?
Well, I think I loved the idea. I'm very concept driven, and I loved the idea of putting out a double single that was my first experience with music with River and my first solo song, Time is the Killer, in one package as a kind of container of memories and like a time capsule that spanned 25 years. That I tend to create and not overthink it or think about what any of it means, but I think something happened right at the 25-year mark where I realized, wow, that's 25 years that, I started playing music with him in Aleka's attic, and then and that I want to put out this solo thing. And so the idea of creating this little time capsule of that whole like that quarter of a century in a sense, was what interested me about releasing those together. Also, to be honest, I don't know if you saw the record cover, but it's a photo of him, us embracing, and I felt like it was my way of protecting him and his music, was putting it out with one of mine so that I could oversee it and, do it in a way that I felt honored him and wasn't something that I would regret or feel uncomfortable, like I'd put this music out and there wasn't a lot of intention. So there was a lot of thought that went into that, and a kind of protective, it was almost like a hug around Aleka's attic, like that I was holding that. So that's really why. And then for that release, and I'd released another song of his just prior, sort of just snuck it on the internet, not without fanfare, and I really loved doing that for the fans. Like, that made me so happy because it was just literally for the fans. Like, I just put it out on an Aleka's attic. You can get it on iTunes and Spotify, and they all found it and shared it, and it just made my day. And so following that was this time capsule piece, Time Gone, which is a combination of Time is the Killer and his song Where I'd Gone was the title of the single, Time Gone. So it was all meant to sort of live together like that. And I still plan to release more. To be honest, River was an incredibly particular artist, and when it came to his music, especially so. He wouldn't let any rough mixes be heard by anyone. He was super, super, super detail-oriented. So it's honestly not felt like my place, even as his collaborator, to just put out his songs, even though I know the fans, I want to on behalf of the fans, but on behalf of him, I have to honor the way he was as an artist. So I have held back on that until I feel like it's right, or I can be sure that at the very least, like, every single detail I can think of was taken care of before I release it. So that's why I've been slow to do that. And I partially wonder, it's the ongoing battle of whether he would want it at all publicly out. So that's been a lot of, what I've had hesitancy with about releasing. But his songs are great, and his songwriting, so of course I want to share it, but I just have to follow the through line and make sure it feels right.
I'd like to talk about some of your earlier musical projects, like Papercranes was a band that you formed, and the concept was to incorporate rotating members, which is so interesting. What, I guess, gave you the idea for that concept?
I mean, I wish I could say that I was super studied about all my decisions, but I follow sort of the muse, for lack of a better way of saying it, and I'm really a fan of stream of consciousness, writing, stream of consciousness, creative projects, producing what comes, another way to speak about it is interdependence, or, no single one of us exists without the help and the connection to others. So every idea or thing that I'm doing is usually, it's like a domino effect that happens. And in regard to Papercranes, that was really my first expression. I was mixing Aleka's Attic after River passed away, and I thought I might put it out, but for all the reasons I cited before, I decided to hold on releasing it. And in the process of mixing it, I was working with this really amazing engineer, Michael Perfit, who still, he works in music. He does a lot of scoring here in LA. And we started making these demos with Michael Tubbs in LA in between mixes. And that became Papercranes. That was the early. So it was already a collaborative idea in the studio, and then I thought to do it live. I bounce around so much for different locations that honestly that rotating thing was also just what city am I in? Who can I get to play these songs with me for a show? And I would get them involved, and we would rehearse and we would play a show. So it wasn't super thought out. It was, and honestly, I would be remiss to say that it was a great idea because, to not have a solid group of players that really grow together and write songs together and then perform them together over a long period of time, that actually does help the music grow. And so in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? I felt like sometimes it was spinning my wheels where it would be an amazing experience to play the shows, but then you kind of start from square one when you move to another city and you got to get all new musicians. And so it was a fun experiment. I thought Papercranes was a great way for me to figure out how to songwrite without River, because he'd done most of the songwriting and I would join in a little, but this was me really doing a lot of the songwriting for the first time and just trying to figure out what I wanted to say, just let what I wanted to say come out through prose. That was something I hadn't done. So that in many ways, Papercranes was an experiment for me as an artist, just to try to come into my own. Yeah.
That was basically the start of you finding your voice as an artist.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'd love for you to talk about Citizens Band, which is such an interesting concept, a political cabaret act unlike anything I can think of. And it went on for about a decade. It incorporated elements of performance art and a lot of guest collaborators, but you were sort of a core of that from the very beginning. And I guess I wanted to ask you about your involvement and, how you took that project and incorporated your own vision into it.
Yeah, well, for a short time I lived in the same building as Sarah Sophie Flicker, who was the founder of the Citizens Band, and we were neighbors, and she asked me if I'd be interested in performing this political cabaret that she wanted to start called, and I don't even know if it had a name on our first show, and it was at this warehouse in Brooklyn, and she said, we're going to have fake blood. You're going to have to crunch in your mouth and bleed. We're all going to have this, what was that called? The thing that everyone would get in the 20s and 30s. It was like a cough that then you'd bleed. I forget what there's a term for it. But yes, we all had consumption. Thank you. Died of consumption at the end of the performance. So that was the most direction I got for the first one. And my dear friends Angela McCluskey, who's an incredible singer-songwriter, and her husband Paul Cantillon also were in that building and living actually in the same apartment with her. So we were all part of that first show. She did trapeze and dance, but it was really a minimalist show. Like we did, 5 songs, and she was right. It just ended in all of us with blood coming out of our mouths, and it wasn't like a scripted thing, which it did grow into a really well produced. Multi-platform, like 30-plus artists and orchestra. We dance, trapeze, so many artistic expressions, set design, costume design. So many artists were involved, and it was really, really moving to be a part of because of the subject matter we were talking about. And the songs that we were doing from the 1920s and 30s that had correlated so well with modern times. It was wild. The songs she would choose and that we'd all choose really matched up. And at the time, it was when it was the Bush administration, I think, and there was the war in Iraq, and there was oil. There was all kinds of issues. So we basically, the idea was to bring song and dance and joyfulness and costuming and, beauty to subject matter that was really difficult to talk about and painful to witness, that was playing out on the world stage and in the news. And so it was like a little pocket of relief, but it was still very much speaking to those things that we all were struggling with culturally and, on the world stage. So in that respect, it was very meaningful and fun. I got to tap dance. I wrote songs. I always played the fortune teller, or I always played the marginalized person in the cast. I think because I'm more ethnic than most of the people that were in the cast at the time. Which I was so proud of and grateful for, but I got to write about my heritage and my Russian heritage, and research through my great uncle Bernie, who's like 90 now, the story of his parents in Russia, and so I wrote a whole song devoted to that, and it was about immigration and immigrating. And at that time, that was a big issue. Now imagine how much bigger it's become now. But so all these things, it just spoke very much to what I believe in as an artist, which is there's really no point in, just doing it for the sake of doing it. In my case, I think everybody's different, but it has to have some meaning and something deeper. I have to connect it to something that we all struggle with so that I can enjoy it, or so that I can feel like what I'm doing makes any kind of, or lasting effect. And honestly, it's not so much about what I'm doing as the wish that if I'm going to put out energy, that somehow it's going to alleviate some questions or suffering or confusion. That's what I aspire to. I'm not sure I've ever actually done that, but that's the aspiration I go into things with. So the Citizens Band satisfied that for me because of the subjects that we were talking about.
And then I'd like to talk about Venus and the Moon, which is this sort of trippy country act that you did. And I really love the song Marry Me, because it's probably a song that people literally play at their weddings, and yet if you listen to the lyrics, they're not very romantic. But it just proves that oftentimes people don't listen to the lyrics. And it reminded me so much of R.E.M's hit To the One I Love, because I remember people used to request that song and dedicate it to their boyfriend or their girlfriend, not realizing that it was actually, again, not a very romantic song at all. And I just wondered, what inspired, I guess, you to write that song in particular?
Well, I felt like it was romantic, but it was romantic about nature and our nature to be free. It did have that lyric at the beginning that specified, the very opposite of marriage, which was sort of that idea that you couldn't marry one person and be happy. Because you can't. What is it? Something about like promise to just one man. Oh, give your hand to one man. Yeah. So I see what you mean in terms of that. But in terms of the relationship with nature, I thought it was really a love song to nature. It was the idea that, like, regardless of all the relationships we go through and all the pain and suffering, where maybe things don't work out in romance, the song of the wind and the trees and the way that, the grass feels when you walk in it barefoot, that's what I'm married to. That was sort of the sentiment. But you're right, I have gotten some people writing in saying like, thank you, I played that at my wedding, and I was like, oh, I hope your husband doesn't know that, or it doesn't sound, it doesn't seem like you're gonna last. But at the same time, like, maybe I hope they never hear that and they get whatever they want out of it. Right. It should be interpreted by however you want to interpret it.
Would you talk a little bit about your creative process as a songwriter, like how the lyrics and the melodies come to you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's melody that other people often bring. In this case, for River, my collaborator Kirk Kelly would bring musical composition, and that would prompt me to write to it. And I usually just put a mic up and I press record. I have a little Pro Tools home where it's just one mic into my laptop, and I have it always set up, so if something inspires me, I can, it's easiest for me if I just have it there, and because if I hear a melody and I start to come up with, a counter melody, a vocal melody, lyrics will come right away too. And so if I just record it, there's a better chance that the song will be captured. That first version will make it into the final version. And for me, if I overthink things or say, oh, that, it doesn't work for me that way. It's strange. I've talked to so many other artists, and everyone's process is different. But for me, the more off the cuff, the more stream of consciousness and the less affectation or concern about what other people might think, or what I might think if I thought it. I interpret my songs later. I write them in the moment, and then I understand what they mean, usually sometimes as far away as, between 3 and 6 months later, I realize what I wrote the song about. Once in a while, there is like a burning thing I have to get out specifically, and I will write a song with that motivation, with just need to get this out. And I think, I don't know if it's true, I'm guessing for other artists, but all musical expression for me and all artistic expression is a way to interpret and transform, feelings that sometimes just language or talking about doesn't do. Music has this transformative and therapeutic way of transmuting my feelings into song, and that helps me, and my wish is always that it helps others too, and that's why I try my best not to. Like right now I'm feeling bad for telling you that Marry Me was a love song to nature, because I just, that's my personal, that's not your takeaway, and it's so important to me that everyone has their own takeaway. It's not about me, it's about, like, did it move you? And I'm curious, like I would be so curious what your interpretation was. That's what I get excited about, because, I think personally, I just don't like to share too much about like what the song means to me. I'd like to see how it moves others.
And I want to point out, when you started this album, it was originally just, the idea was to go into the studio, maybe make an EP, and it slowly evolved into, its current form. And would you talk sort of about the moment when you realized it was going to be a tribute album of sorts, and how that realization came to you?
Yeah, gosh, I don't remember exactly how. It was similar to songwriting, and like I said, I'm not very methodical and detail-oriented. I just started making music. Kirk and I started writing together after Time Gone, that piece that just kind of, we got inspired, so we kept going, and we thought, well, let's just keep going. Let's keep making music. We don't know what it is. And I guess probably halfway through, I just had this overwhelming realization that I had to call the record River, and I had to include him in it. And from that moment forward, the record finished itself. It was like, then I knew what the record was. Like, I am concept driven, but I'm not detail oriented. So for me, as soon as I understand why I'm doing something, everything moves out of every obstacle goes away, and I just finish the project. But if I don't have that certainty of what, I'm just gonna let myself create, and I don't know what it means. And so that moment was very pivotal, because once I knew what it meant, what I was doing, I could finish it, and it was effortless. It just, I think we finished 2 more songs came out of it that weren't expected. Like you said, it was going to be an EP, and those, just were so meant to be. One of which was a song that he wrote the lyrics to, that I repurposed lyrics of his from Aleka's Attic, and the title Lost in Motion, which I think you all saw the video to. And that came about organically, you know, after I'd sort of realized I was going to call the record that. I wasn't even going to use, I wasn't sure I could write to this music. It was so beautiful and haunting, but it seemed like it was a film score. I couldn't imagine putting vocals to it. And then one day, weirdly, his lyrics started humming in my head to it, and I got the mic and I did what I always do, and that became Lost in Motion. And so it was nothing like his original melody, but a lot of lyrics remain. And yeah, so for me, that's just how I really enjoy creating. When I don't overthink, you know, it just has to feel right. And I have to have the space and the time and the microphone set, you know, there's certain things you need to prepare for that creative expression, but that's about as far into premeditation I go. Everything else just kind of falls out. For me, that's just, it feels the most authentic. I know that I can't be making things up if I just let it happen. Do you know what I mean? And I think I'm always impressed with people who conceptualize and then they know exactly how it's gonna play out, and you know who they're gonna bring in and how, you know, and I don't do it that way. I don't know. It might be that I'm lazy. It's not definitely. Seriously, I think it might just be that I'm lazy.
It's so interesting because I love the lyric about the words that your father left me, and I was convinced that you had written that lyric, and as it turns out, River had written that lyric. And I just think it's so beautiful that you literally co-wrote a song with him on this album. You literally incorporated him as a songwriter on this album, and it also addresses your father. And so that was all just kind of...
Yeah. That's interesting. You're right, and you're the one who brought that up to me, which this was the first time I really thought about it. But the way that the intonation on that line is what does make me think about losing a parent, like them passing away, which my father passed away in 2015. And yet when he wrote it, you know, it was more meant to be like, these were the words my father left me. Like, you know, this is what he taught me. But I never thought of it as a loss related until the way that we put it in this song and you brought it up. Otherwise, I always thought of it the way, you know, I never thought that the lyric meant that the father was no longer with us until you interpreted it that way. But it was very poignant and made it mean more to me. So I thank you for sharing your interpretation. You see? It matters when other people interpret.
I think that's what's beautiful about this album is even though it's so deeply personal, you managed to make all of these songs address universal themes of loss and grief and all types of loss. Also, the end of a relationship, which can often be catastrophic. And I wonder, why do you think, like I was trying to compare this to another album, but there really aren't a lot of albums that deal with loss, and yet it's such a universal experience. We're all going to die. Why do you feel like there's such a, I guess, so much cultural anxiety about that topic? And I guess, were you worried at all that it might hurt album sales? Like, that probably doesn't occur to you. Like,
there are no album sales anymore.
Right. It's a streaming sale.
Doesn't matter, that part. No, I mean, I think I really don't have the answer as to why. I will say that through the process of making this record, I began to research and explore more, you know, why we're not a death-positive culture, why we don't talk about loss more, why we don't provide more support for those who need it, and why we don't provide more time off when people lose their loved ones at work, you know, like how people have to just suit up and my experience from grief, and certainly my father being the most recent loss, is it just that everything falls away and nothing matters but your connection with this person and them being gone and you not being able to physically see them or talk to them again that's so devastating, that the idea that like we have to suit up and go into an office soon after those experiences, as opposed to nurture that, you know, part of us, or nourish that part of us that is devastated, and have the space to do that. It just, you know, it breaks my heart. It broke my heart to think about that, and so I think this record, for me, was a way to offer a little 8 songs worth of a space to do that in, you know, a kind of a totem to all those that everyone has lost, and to bring in and remember the people that meant a lot to each of us that are no longer here. And I was so blessed to have a producer and co-writer in Kirk who contextualized those emotions through string arrangements and, you know, horn arrangements. To actually have a record that was scored, you know, I'd never had that experience being in indie bands, and, you know, like where things like the musicians came in and it was written. He wrote the parts that they played. They weren't just riffing, and I picked what I liked and cut it into my song, which was my experience with, you know, being a child of Pro Tools era music, and yeah, just not having that, a producer like that. Like he really, you know, we really communicated much like super closely on that, on the core heart space of the record, you know. And then I just felt like I was in good hands, and there was like, he was able to translate so much of like the heartache of loss through the compositions, which afforded me the opportunity to actually just focus on singing and, you know, and songwriting, the lyric writing, and letting that be all I really had to worry about, which was a first for me. In previous projects, I was involved in every last aspect, and it can be so overwhelming to do so much that I think, you know, the lyrics and the vocals at times suffered comparatively. Like I feel so, like I had the time this time to really sit in these feelings and think of others experiencing that, and try to translate that through my voice and through the lyrics, and knowing that the music was being taken care of in such a beautiful way. So yes, I probably went off tangent and started trying to interpret it through a musical lens, because that's what I like to do. But in terms of loss, it isn't a prevalent thing, and people aren't making a lot of records about that, and it's not something that is celebrated. But it's what I'm interested. I've always kind of just pick a subject or a concept and I go with that, and to me that's what this record is about. And so when I play live performances, I had, you know, the great fortune to tour with Pete Yorn before the holidays, and just
it's very different from the Red Hot Chili Peppers,
very,
probably.
very.
Right.
But that whole experience, and Kirk came along and we just did it as a duo to actually, you know, meet and play for crowds that didn't know what to expect. Maybe we're coming for Pete, and to talk about loss and to feel the energy in the room, co-mingle around like that shared part that we all just don't talk about, was really profound for me as a performer, and it only emboldened me to continue to tell that story through this record, and to travel with it, and to tour with it, and to play live shows, because I think it's something that, you know, we all connect with, but it's that thing that just gets shelved away. We don't talk about it too much. So there's a lightness that comes from talking about it after, like the joyfulness and the people that came up and shared stories. It changed performance for me to have it connect to this very universal truth. And it just goes along with what I was saying before about art. For me, it has to do that. Something about it has to connect to something deeper. Otherwise, you know, it just feels like a waste of time. Life is so short, and as it is, I don't think I have that much longer here. I don't know. We all don't, right? Or who knows? Could be tomorrow. Could be 50 years. I might live to I'm 100. I don't know. But the point is, like, if I'm not thinking about what am I doing, and is it something that's creating more joy or helping I just am interested in helping. And so I try to make my art do that too. And I'm so grateful that this record has already, begun to resonate with people, and certainly those who have experienced great loss.
My last question, I know this album for me has been very healing. Was the process of writing it and then eventually, touring with it, was that cathartic and healing for you as well? And ultimately, did this change your view on death?
Wow, that's a great question. Honorable mention to you, James Herman, for really, you've done your research too. I was like, how'd you know that? Did this? Yes, absolutely. This is incredibly, I didn't know what I was in for, I just knew I had to do it. That's all I knew when I decided to call it River and make this record and put it out, was that it was like, you must do this. Something was like pushing me. And everything that's come out as after that initial understanding, or allowing, I should say, it wasn't really a pushing as much as like just allowing that to bubble up and be my expression, and honoring of my brother. Everything that's come from it has been, for me personally, a healing experience, and one that has connected me more deeply with others, and that has connected me to music more intimately, and with my brother again in many ways. That has really connected me to that like part of him that it will always be here for me, that musical connection. It just woke all of that up, and so the answer is yes, it absolutely had a transformative effect, and I'm at the very least, if that's all that this record does, well, I'm super grateful for that.
I think that's the most music can do. It's Grammy week in LA, and this was one of my favorite albums, as you know, of last year, and I'm so flattered that you took the time to come and talk about your work, even though you're very humble, and I know it's not your favorite thing to do, but I really appreciate you giving us some insight into this beautiful album, and I can't wait to see and hear what you do next.
Thank you so much, and thank you.